All right, everybody's coming in. Hey, everybody, welcome. It's great to have y'all join us today. I'm Molly Davis. I'm the president and CEO of Radio Research Consortium. And we've got other great members of our team here today, Brian Stauffer, David Ginsberg, and Dave Sullivan. And we're going to take you through some audience trends by format. Just so you know, a little heads up, these are aggregate trends that we are sharing. So we wanted to give you the caveat that your individual station mileage may vary. But we think this is some exciting information to share with you. And obviously, if you want a look at information like this, or you want to dig deeper into your own station's numbers, all you need to do is reach out to us. We had huge registration for this today. Actually, the largest registration we've had so far for a webinar that we've done. So we'll give it maybe one more minute for people to trickle in. But while we wait, feel free to drop a hello in the chat and let us know where you're joining from. And we're just so excited to have all y'all here today and excited to share this info with you. If you were not at PMGC, we're glad you joined us for this encore presentation. Or hey, Nicole, good to see you. Oh, hey, Rima. And for those of you who were there and just want a second look, we're glad you're here with us. Hey, Karen. Oh my gosh. Hey, Izzy. Good to see you. I will also say Q&A should be enabled. So as we go through the presentation, if you want to drop questions in there, we will have time for Q&A at the end. But if there are some that come in that are timely, we can try to address them as they come in. Hey, Peter, great to see you. Saw Judy in there. Oh, hey, Gabriel, good to see you. All right, we're at 3:02, so I say we get going. How do you guys feel about that? Ready to go? All right, so I'm going to advance the slides, so y'all let me know when you're ready to advance, but we'll go ahead and address terminology, and then I'm going to turn my camera off so that everybody can just see you, and then you'll just let me know when to advance the slides, okay? All right, take it away.
All right, we're going to make this quick. I want to make sure you know your radio acronyms. TSL, time spent listening. PPM is portable people meter. CDM is continuous diary measurement. MSA is the metropolitan survey area. DMA is the designated marketing area. TSA is the total service area. PUR stands for persons using radio. PUM is persons using measured media, which includes television. NRD is the National Regional Database. CUME is your unique individual audience. Average quarter hour is the number of persons listening to the station on average in any given quarter hour of the day. Diary measurement is simply respondents fill out a paper diary, mail it back to Nielsen with their recalled listening for the previous week. In tab are the number of accepted surveys gathered by Nielsen for any particular metro market. And the Ps, P1, P2, P3, P4. P1 are listeners that are listening to you either exclusively or predominantly. P2 means they listen to you regularly, but you're a secondary choice. P3 and P4 are more secondary, tertiary listeners. And typically, the gain can be made from converting P3s and P2s to P1 listeners.
All right. Izzy commented that he never knew PUM included TV. So there you go. I see Jeff has a hand up. Jeff, if you've got a question, will you pop it in the Q&A? All right. Ready for the next slide?
I think we're ready. Okay. All right, so just want to start with a little background about the data first. Everything we're going to be looking at today is based on full week, Monday through Sunday, 6 to midnight. We do have a couple of other day parts prepared if anyone would like to look at those separately. But in the interest of time today, we're going to focus on full week measurement. We're going to start out looking at high-level totals across all formats and both PPM and diary methodologies, and then we'll break those out for you a bit further as we go on. So our first chart here includes a combination of PPM markets and continuous diary measurement markets. PPM markets are the 45 non-embedded markets with electronic measurement and 6+ demo. CDM markets are the 44 diary markets with monthly reporting and 12+ demo. Methodology is obviously a bit different, but this gives us the largest possible set of apples to apples data in terms of monthly reporting for this presentation. As far as formats go, we're looking at some of the key non-commercial formats: news talk, contemporary Christian, classical, AAA, and jazz as reported by Nielsen. Other platforms out there may classify some stations or formats slightly differently, but as everyone knows, the RRC partners with Nielsen, so we're using these Nielsen-defined format descriptors. All right, so what is the good news? The good news is that non-commercial radio's audience has grown. Cume in 2024, as you can see on the chart here, ranged from 32.4 million to 33.8 million. From January 25 through March 26, that's 5 consecutive quarters. That range was 36.3 to 37.7 million. So despite some slight downward movement, Cume is still 9.6% higher than it was 2 years ago. And we see a similar pattern with AQH hovering around 1 million through 2024 and just under 1.2 million since 2025. And we can go to the next slide. All right, so on this slide, you might notice the dotted line and the increase in both Cume and AQH in January 2025. This coincides with Nielsen's introduction of the 3-minute qualifier in PPM markets. So a panelist now only needs 3 minutes of exposure in a quarter hour to receive credit for listening to a station. Previous threshold was 5 minutes. A Nielsen study showed that 23% of listening occasions are only 3 to 4 minutes long. So this change was intended to capture more of those short burst listening events. And overall, you can see the orange Cume line in this chart trended continuously upward. There's a slight dip in December 2024, where holiday listening and post-election news fatigue probably factors in. But overall, it's a very steady upward trend in Cume, both before and after implementation of the 3-minute qualifier. And again, the good news here is that the Cume growth that we've seen is not a product of the 3-minute qualifier. It's real natural growth. Nielsen's year-over-year impact analysis tells us that individual stations did see some modest Cume growth thanks to those 3 and 4 minute listening occasions, but Cume was flat across the service. It may have ticked up 1% in a few demos and day parts, but for the most part, Cume was flat across the service. AQH, on the other hand, did benefit from the 3-minute qualifier and rose about 14% across demos and day parts. And we can go to the next slide. So with that in mind, we thought it would be interesting to try to get an apples to apples read on what the trends would look like without the 3-minute qualifier. So what we did here is we stripped out that 14% lift post January 2025, and the results might surprise you. Cume is obviously unchanged, as we know. However, AQH no longer has that big spike in January 2025, but even without the 3-minute qualifier, non-commercial Cume and AQH are both higher now than they were during any month in 2024. And if we narrow it down even farther and just look at the 3-minute qualifier time frame, so January 2025 forward, the most recent numbers are still 1 to 2% higher than they were in January 2025. As I mentioned earlier, this is for full week, Monday through Sunday, 6 a to midnight for PPM 6+ and Diary 12+, but other demos and day parts are showing a similar story as well. And we can go to the next slide.
Thanks, Brian. I'll take it from here. When we look at the PPM markets, as Brian said, the 45 non-embedded markets. So for example, if you're New York, this is going to take New York as a whole. It's not going to isolate and double count Nassau, Suffolk, Middlesex, Middlesex, Somerset, Union, This is just the big markets. And we're going to do the same five formats that non-commercial radio generally services very well: news talk, contemporary Christian, classical, AAA, and jazz. Next slide, please. And what we're going to do, I'm not trying to go fast through these, but I just want to keep the message simple and keep everybody focused. Just as Brian was showing us, you've got a line right down the center. To the left of that is pre-Nielsen's 3-minute qualifier. So then January 2025 begins on that dotted line forward. And for the most part, everything to the right of the line, including the 3-minute qualifier, is doing better than everything was yesterday. So that's for News Talk Person 6 Plus. 2554 News Talk, you're going to see the same thing if you go forward. Same thing, much better post 3-minute qualifier than prior. And then 55 plus, that's the third demo we're looking at for each of these formats. Maybe not quite as distinct, but yes, clearly News Talk is doing better post qualifier than pre-qualifier. So everything today is doing well. And as someone sarcastically said in the chat, gee, radio listening isn't dead. Yes, you're right. Next slide, please.
Oops, I went too far.
Now we're going to go to contemporary Christian, again, starting with person 6 plus. That's the base demo, the universe estimate for PPM. Same thing here, left of the dotted line, everything was at a lower point than where it is to the right. Still going to have peaks and valleys on a monthly basis. Still going to have months where the data can be explained, other months where you just have to move on, it can't, but everything to the right is doing better. How about persons 2554, the buying agency demo? Same situation here for contemporary Christian stations. And then persons 55 plus. Here's where you can see on the third slide for CCM stations. That's where, again, everything is better more recently than it was before. And now if you go to the third format, we're going to look at classical. Classical, person 6 plus. We're back to the same situation here. Everything to the right is doing better than it was for 6 plus. 2554. This is when you're looking at the lines again, all looking better to the right than they were to the left. And then persons 55 plus. There again, maybe it does look a little flat to the right, but the right is better than the left. And the purpose of these baselines, these averages for all these markets that we're talking about, the purpose of that is to give you a baseline, and that can be the thesis of writing to David, Brian, or myself and saying, let's do a review of our numbers. And then if we go to the next format, AAA may be a little closer, than what some other formats look like for persons 6 plus. If we go to persons 2554, that's where, again, maybe the biggest thing here you do see is that aggressive jump in AQH. So this is a music format. Time spent listening is very important to it. All doing better today versus yesterday. And then 55 plus, not necessarily a core demo. You still see for a smaller niche format like this, there are going to be some jump arounds, but this is a format again where at the very least everything is stable to the right and doing pretty well. The format and the industry are not falling off a cliff. And then finally, we get to jazz music. By the way, when you get to jazz versus news talk in these PPM markets, there's a far smaller sample size. So you are going to see more of these, peaks and dips and things. This I would, watch my words and just say it's the same. It's consistent. In the last year, 2025, to the right, that there's been a lot of news happening, and that always draws people to news stations and pulls them away from music stations, whatever. So there's the person 6 plus. And then if we look at 2554, this does show more gains, and especially that AQH line, the green line, everything's looking better, more steady to the right. And then finally, 55 plus. This, again, is pretty solid and flat from left to right. Still dips, still going to be big swings. you could probably look at these and make your own analysis based on news cycles and other things. Like when you see a big dip here in AQH last summer for jazz, I mean, those are the months, if my eyes are working here, when there was a lot going on in the upcoming presidential election. So that's going to be a distract. Actually, I'm sorry, that's the first year of the presidency. But anyway, that's the point of looking at these five non-commercial formats all rolled into one and seeing what the top line is. And now I'll pass it to David, who's going to look at the CDM markets.
Before we do that, there are a couple of comments here in the chat. If we could just address them before the chat continues and we lose them. So Matt is asking, do we have the percentages for the increases?
I mean, I know Brian has some macro percentages, but looking at these monthly changes is just too granular. Brian?
Yeah, I would say right now we have the changes or the percentage changes that I mentioned earlier from say the start of the measurement period here to the most recent measurement period, or January 2025 to the most recent period. I think I mentioned that one of the increases was 9.6%. As far as month to month or more granular than that, it's certainly possible to pull those. I don't have them handy right in front of me though.
Got it. So, hey, Matt, just reach out to us separately. And, again, if you want to do a deeper dive into some of this, that's what we're here for. And then Izzy is asking about we had talked about this before, and he's right. He said, didn't the RRC advise us not to compare pre 3-minute qualifier to post? And so he's questioning that in light of the slides that we're showing.
Here, we're just doing it from a macro level because, again, now there's enough data that's been collected. What we didn't want to do was rush to judgment in June of last year with only 6 months of the new, especially with all the recent news events, around a turnover in Washington, change in the White House, all that stuff going on. It just would have muddied the waters. Now there's enough data that we can take a collective look, and then we can take that back with you one-on-one and your station and look at how it is for you and your market.
We also, I think it's worth just reminding everybody that the 3-minute qualifier is not capturing new listening. It's capturing listening you already had, but you were not getting credited for because of the way the qualifier works and the quarter hours. And that's something we can always talk about more, but just as a reminder, I think that's worth mentioning. All right, David,
Well
you want to go ahead?
Sure, thank you. Before I go into the CDM data, I just want to clarify, I misspoke and I apologize. At the beginning of the presentation, we were going through the acronyms and definitions. PUMM, PUM, person using measured media is a radio term. It does not include TV. I misspoke and I apologize for the confusion I may have triggered. Now then, for the format, you're welcome. For the CDM market trends, and a reminder that continuous diary measurement isn't a single month, it's a rolling 3-month average. And so we often advise don't make a decision based on a single month's worth of data. It's a rolling average, and you want to check it quarterly before you make any determinations. That said, let's take a look starting with our News Talk 12 Plus format. And a caveat with the CDM data, unlike PPM, which is a different type of measurement, the CDM data is a bit more mixed and a bit flatter, in part because News Talk in particular in CDM markets is actually down slightly, where Christian Contemporary is thriving and growing quickly, and AAA is also having a resurgence. And in select markets, and again, this is an aggregate across the country, in select markets, News Talk is doing quite well, and stations that own both a News Talk signal and a classical signal are seeing a lot of audience sharing as news fatigue has become a real issue for a lot of listeners. So that said, this is News Talk in CDM markets 12 plus. It's essentially flat. It's down slightly in AQH and QM, but holding steady with spikes, as you see in June of 2025. There were some spikes at that point and has leveled off in the time we've measured since then. If we go to the next slide, we'll look at 25 to 54-year-olds. And again, you can see the fluctuations are a bit more visible here Again, this is in part because of the way diaries are distributed and returned by listeners who are using memory recall to fill out their surveys, as opposed to the people meter, which is picking up an encoded signal. And so for News Talk in this demo, we do see some fluctuations in QM and AQH, and yet the fact that the QM has remained steady overall, or generally steady overall, in a demo that, in particular, in the younger end of this, that the industry needs to recycle to replace the older listeners that may age out, this is still an encouraging sign. And we go to the 55 plus demographic, and you'll see their listening is much steadier. Their AQH may fluctuate a bit, but their listening tends to be steadier, and the QM has largely held throughout the duration here. Next slide, please. So contemporary Christian, and this line illustrates the growth of this format over the past couple of years. If you look, it's quite evident both in QM and AQH that the time spent, the listening audience is there and spending more time with Christian contemporary. That's also aided because the growth of the number of Christian contemporary stations across the country has increased in this 3-year period. We see them grabbing signals and expanding in virtually every market. And we'll see this carrying forward if we go to our 25 to 54-year-olds. Again, look at the growth here. And I've heard this described in some places as moms in minivans who are driving a lot of this, and especially in middays and afternoons. But the format has broad appeal, and in some markets is consistent with traditional AC stations in pulling audience in and holding them. Next slide, please. And again, the 55 plus audience is growing with the contemporary Christian format. If you look at where they were in March of 2023 versus March of 2026, there's been a substantial growth in QM and AQH, and that is continuing to hold steady as we move forward. Next slide, please. So classical, and again, you can see the fluctuations in classical as people kind of come in and out of the format. We've seen stations in some markets, classical stations are in the top 3, in some cases number 1. And the classical stations that are thriving are doing so in part because they're making it much more accessible to their listeners through guides and explainers and introductory pieces on their websites that make it much less intimidating for new listeners to get acclimated to the format. And again, we do see dips and rises in both the Q and AQH here for persons 12 plus. That is going to be in some cases dependent on what's happening in the news and in the country, as well as the diaries that are returned. There's probably not a lot of 12-year-olds filling out diaries for classical stations. Next slide, please. You can see the classical growth and valleys here in the 25 to 54-year-old demo. You can, that's very funny, John. You can see the spikes. There's a dip that occurs in September 2024. And then as that fall and winter proceeds, that cube is largely held steady, whether that's a reaction to news fatigue or an escape, or because it's more suited to workplace listening as return to office mandates that have increased over this time period. It's still strong. The 55 plus audience has actually fluctuated a bit. The Q has eroded and then has begun to climb back. You can see the growth in dips here along with the AQH charts. Again, market by market is going to differ. And if you're curious about your own market, we'd be happy to set aside some time one-on-one and take a deeper dive into your specific market and format. Next slide, please. AAA format is doing quite well in a number of markets across the country. And whether that's due to commercial radio sort of ceding the position for, especially for new music and variety, the growth is encouraging. We're seeing some real growth, especially since June of 2025, in both Q and AQH for this format 12 plus. Next slide, please. The 25 to 54-year-olds, what's interesting here is that although the Q has been up and down and has leveled off, the AQH factors are really like an EKG graph. It's really interesting to see how people are tuning in and out in those quarter hours across these books, but the audience remains there. And 55 plus, please. Again, the growth in the demo is being driven to some degree by the upper end of the demo, whether it's a reaction to the limited classic rock station in the marketplace, an escape from news talk. They haven't yet gravitated towards classical. It's encouraging to see the 55 plus audience becoming fans of AAA formats in various markets across the country. Next slide, please. The jazz chart, I want to provide a caveat before I go into the numbers here, and that jazz is a very limited format. There's only just over a dozen pure jazz stations, or primarily jazz stations, left in the country. I was the GM in one of them before I joined the RSC. I know how difficult the format is to produce. And yet, jazz is doing fairly well with a steady cume. There's been some drop off since September 2025, and AQHs are up and down. But the jazz audience is still remaining steady. Again, this is a much more limited data set because there's far fewer stations in this format than there are in the others we've measured for this presentation. Next slide, please. The 25 to 54-year-olds, their passion for jazz spiked in December of 2024 and has ebbed a bit, and yet AQH curiosity spiked last spring. It has dipped back down again, and is the cume in this format in AQH have actually dropped down from where they were in March of 2023. That is more a function of the format and the demo than it is a methodology issue. Continue, please. And the 55 plus audience, which has long been the bread and butter for jazz as a format. Again, there's been some dips, ins and outs. Whether they are sampling other formats or not is to be determined. But you can see the cume and AQH have actually dipped a bit. The cume has dipped a bit. The AQH has risen in this time frame compared to where it was 3 years ago. Next slide, please. And
Any questions at this point, Molly?
Yeah, let's jump into some questions that are both in the chat, and then there's one in the Q&A. So Lisa is asking, I get how it affects TSL, but how does the 3-minute qualifier affect cume?
It doesn't affect cume. It may have an impact on daily cume, but for the most part, and again, this is only PPM markets that are dealing with the 3-minute qualifier update to the methodology. CDM markets, which David just covered, that did not impact them. So how does it impact? It's really about TSL. It's really about, and Brian mentioned this, it's really about people, only writing down so much of their time. I'm sorry, not writing down. In PPM, it detects you. And then with the 3 minutes, there's a lot of listening that took place in the 3 and 4 minute range below that previous threshold. Now that's being counted, which you stated very well, Molly. This isn't new listeners. This is listening that always existed. It just wasn't being counted before for PPM market stations.
I think if you think about it, this kind of helps me if you think of a clock, right? And we're measuring by the quarter hour. If you've got somebody who listens for 5 minutes, but their listening crosses the first quarter hour into the second quarter hour. So 3 minutes took place in the first quarter hour and 2 minutes in the second quarter hour. With the 5-minute qualifier, you didn't get credit for any of that. The 3-minute qualifier now gives you credit, at least for that listening that fell in that first quarter hour. If that helps at all. So other questions that are in the chat. So Jeffrey asked, are our increases keeping up with general market increases due to the 3-minute qualifier?
I'm sorry, state that one again.
Are our increases keeping up with general market increases due to the 3-minute qualifier?
I can throw that to Brian, but in general, I think we are outpacing the market.
Right. Brian, do you have anything to add?
I would agree with that. I think I would want to. Yeah, I think I'll leave it at that for now. I would agree with Dave's assessment there.
I think and somebody jump in and correct me if I'm wrong, but yes, if you look at all persons using radio, that's where you're getting some of this messaging around decline in using broadcast audience. But what we're seeing is that non-commercial radio is bucking that trend. So we would argue, I think, or I would at least argue, I don't want to put words in my colleagues' mouths, that in a scenario where you might see some of these graphs where the listening looks relatively flat, if all persons using radio is in decline, flat is a positive.
Right.
David, you unmuted, so I didn't know if you wanted to jump in there.
No, but I piggyback on that. You're right. And cumes overall are not what they were 3 years ago. And so you're having a larger share of a smaller overall cume in your market in most cases.
John asked, does the RRC have format-specific webinars? That's a great question, and we're definitely going to take that under advisement. We are still, I would say, dipping our toes into the webinar pool and trying to do more of these. So we're going to put that down as a suggestion, and I appreciate that. That's great. Let's see. Oh, and Lisa, thank you. Lisa says she browses the RRC site for training videos and material. Thank you for that plug, Lisa. I appreciate that. And yes, there's lots. There are training videos and all kinds of things on our website that you can browse. And John, as you're new, you should definitely reach out to us, and we'll be glad to give you a tour of the website and talk about all the ways that we can help you. So just reach out. Our contact information is going to show up on the screen here in a couple of slides. So get in touch with us for sure. And then let's see. James, he asked, do you have a list of the top performing stations by format? This is a question we get asked a lot. And we're looking into whether or not that's something that we can start putting out there. And that's kind of all I have for you on that right now. Let's see. Okay, I think that we covered the questions that are in the chat. If we missed anything, just drop it in the Q&A because I think I'm getting a little bit lost with all the messages in the chat. So, but I think we can go back to the presentation and what it all means.
To summarize it for everybody, what it all means, the recovery is real. It's led by Cume. What does that mean? Everything starts with the number of listeners you have. Then you, after that, can analyze their time spent listening. So this is real, and it's led by Cume. This is not a case where, like in donor data, we keep hearing that the number of donors is going down, but the average dollar per donor is going up. The Cume is holding its own for the most part through these seasons, and we're going to keep monitoring this for you. News pulls in listeners, music keeps them. That's another way to think about this. You know, news stations depend on news cycles to get people to remember your brand and come to you. Music, however, once we leave news for fatigue or whatever, the music stations, if they're programmed well, have a tendency to keep us. And then this kind of ties back the third point to the first one. Read AQH with care, because like we said, it starts with Cume and then it's TSL based. So it is the bottom line, but you still need to understand if your AQH and your share are flat or rising, what the backbone of that is. And this is a public media moment, just like in the case of, you know, the dollars and the donation dollars that came in last year as a public response to many formats and stations losing CPB, you know, funds. Guess what? You know, this is a moment where that could have impacted listening as well. So we're going to keep monitoring it, and we hope that everything continues to move forward.
We've seen that local, and we see it stressed at every conference, especially in the last couple of years between the run study, the rural run study we saw this year. Local is what's driving the bus. And just to point something, you know, one of the things that we've seen, there's been more curiosity since the rescission happened in the end of CPB last year that drove sampling among listeners that either had not listened to public radio in a long time or never had, and had a preconceived notion based on their own media telling them what this was versus what they actually heard. And so there was new sampling, and we're seeing stations that are really driving hard on the local angle, whether they're partnering with other local nonprofit news institutions to create a deeper local news portal and using their website newsletters to help facilitate that. Single topic newsletters are driving the bus. That's doing really well. Izzy, it's driving Cume, it's driving website traffic, it's driving social media traffic. It is driving traffic to websites for the affiliated nonprofit journalism partners. Newsletters drive a lot of traffic back to the website and sampled listening. The stations that are carrying both news and music are seeing a lot of audience sharing. News fatigue is real. The news cycle is in this country lately seems to be relentless and not always the most positive things we're going to hear. And so there is listener fatigue that is driving them to other formats, looking for an escape from it. And then again, we talked about the sampling. and driving home the notion that sustaining membership is what allows public media, non-commercial media, to thrive. And, putting my programmer hat back on from many years ago, I would run station promos that said, you subscribe, you pay for content from Netflix, you pay for content from Hulu. Why wouldn't you pay for public radio as well? As simple as that. And we've seen an uptick. Obviously, the donations have leveled off since the rescission and the big fundraising hauls we saw last spring and last fall. But yet the momentum is still there. And how can we capitalize on that moving forward as the interest levels off from those curious new listeners?
All right, and just a quick final summary.
1 second.
Oh, yeah.
Hey, Brian, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but
Sure.
David, Matt Schaefer-Powell was asking if you could explain more back to this other, let me back up once, about bridging music and news.
And that we've seen stations, excuse me, I'm still getting my voice back from being sick. We're seeing stations that have a classical signal and a news talk signal, or a news talk and a AAA signal, where when you look at in PD Advantage, for example, when you're the P1, what's the P2? And the P2 is often the other station in your group. And we see this reversing a lot. So if your news talk is number one for a lot of listeners, your music station is number two, and vice versa. And that's where so much of that sharing is happening.
Brian.
All right. So I'm going to bring it home here with a quick summary of the presentation here. Just looking at the 2+ year trend of combined PPM and CDM audiences for non-commercial radio. There's some familiar patterns. QM, as I mentioned earlier, ranged from a low of 32.4 million in June 2024, leading into the summer, and a high of 37.7 million in March 2025. There's a lot going on in late 2024, early 2025, but again, this growth was real in non-commercial radio. Remember that the 3-minute qualifier did not affect QM, yet we saw a 9.6% increase over that 2+ year period. AQH saw a bigger increase during that time, 17.2%. We know a lot of that is attributed to the 3-minute qualifier, but like we saw earlier, even if you take away that lift from the 3-minute qualifier, AQH still increased by a couple percentage points during that time. The high and low AQH months were the same as QM, a low of almost 960,000 in June 2024 and a high of around 1.2 million in June 2025.
All right, some highlights, and these are intended to be anecdotal highlights, just to share some good news with you at a time when we could probably all use a bit of good news in this world. So WBOR in April, as a parting gift to Izzy, ranked #1 overall in the market per AQH shares, person 6+. And some of the big hitters like KQED, KNOW, KUOW, UNC all landed at the top of their PPM markets in April as well. Alaska Public Radio has remained #1 for 5 straight books. I'm going to put some money on the fact it'll be 6 straight very soon. The single topic newsletters and the heavy focus on local news. And Izzy asked a question in the chat. I can tell you, as an example, Hawaii Public Radio has a phenomenal array of newsletters, including a daily deep dive that comes out late day. Vermont Public Radio does something very similar with a variety of newsletters. There's a morning newsletter that is your local weather, your local news, local news highlights, at least something deep dive. They have other single topic newsletters that are much more lifestyle oriented, such as gardening and how to grow a seed. It's an ongoing series. Those do drive QM. It's not an AQH play, it's a QM play that drives interest among casual listeners and increases listening through those means by piquing interest off air. And then contemporary Christian stations, again, are doing very well. The growth of that format across the country has been rapid and quite strong, and continues to grow in QM and TSL.
All right, we're to Q&A time. I'll put my video back on. There is a question, Judith, and Judith, I'm going to read it as you have it in here, and then we might need some clarification. Judith asked, what is the delivery method for the stats? Car radio, terrestrial radio in home, stream, apps, stations via NPR apps, all things combined.
Well, we use PPM and CDM data for the presentation. So it's Nielsen's methodologies. We collated the numbers into the presentation you're looking at.
I think, Judith, maybe you can clarify for us a little bit. Are you asking what types of consumption are measured by the methodologies? Yes. Okay. Okay. So what types of listening are measured by those methodologies is what Judith is asking. Brian,
well, the PPM.
Yeah. One of y'all, who wants to take it?
the PPM is clearly about stations being encoded. So that's the first thing, is your station encoded, and was I exposed to your signal if I'm a panelist, for example. Then the CDM markets, which David covered, also the other diary markets too. That's all about recall and having a good brand in my head that I remember to write you down 2-3 days later when I get to my diary. So anywhere that it captures, it captures.
So to add to that, PPM will capture whether it's a car radio, an over-the-air radio, a stream, headphones, etc. Diary markets are dependent on both personal recall and someone specifically writing down in their diary, I listened via the stream today from 3 to 4 p.m. and not I listened over the air. Generally, and if you look at diary comments from any market in the country that has diaries, people will write down the station or the tagline or the show or the host. They don't really, or NPR. They won't mention, in most cases, I streamed it on Tuesday and I listened over the air on Thursday. They very rarely will make that designation on their own.
But it is an option in the diary.
It is. And hopefully the M survey will address some of that as well, that people be more precise in how they consume the medium.
Yes. And M survey is, I guess we're getting that first data now, right? That has M survey. Am I correct on that? Yes.
Yes.
I'm seeing that. So for those who are new or missed this announcement, and this is specific to diaries, so Nielsen released M survey for the spring 26 diary data, and that is for roughly 15% of diary panelists. So only a portion of diaries will be M survey, but it does allow for those 15% of respondents to complete the diary on a phone or on a computer. Mobile survey, M survey. And having gotten a look at the M survey device, yes, it does have a check whether you listened via terrestrial radio or via stream. So just having that as that option, I think will be sort of a prompt for people to like, oh yeah, I listened to it via stream. The question though is really how many people differentiate, if they walk into their kitchen and they say, hey, Alexa, and anybody who's got an Alexa in their room, Alexa just talked to you probably when I said that. But, are they differentiating that? Is your average person differentiating that as a stream versus a radio? That's a hard question to answer. Let's see. Okay. What other questions? There's not anything in the Q&A right now. The chat's quiet, but okay, here we go. For programmers that had to explain the measurement change to their bosses, what 2 to 3 things would you suggest they tell them about the national trends in the first 15 months? Looking for stories that leaders can carry into the meetings they have with boards, et cetera. That's a really great question. Who wants to tackle that?
I'll take a crack at it if you want.
Go for it.
Don't all rush at once for this. That is a phenomenal question. There's a couple of things that I point out. There has been, in the past year plus, a lot of new sampling from listeners that previously either had lapsed as NPR listeners or public media listeners that have returned because of the news about the rescission and the end of CPB. I would look, if you subscribe to ebook, check the 24-hour QM in your metro market, and then check where it was a couple of years ago. QMs in most markets, overall 24-hour QM, whether it's 6 plus or 12 plus, have dropped in almost every market in the country. And so, as an example, When I was growing up 1,000 years ago, when WBCN was the coolest rock station in the world, 90+% of the available audience was listening to the radio at any given point in the course of a week. In Boston now, it's in the low 70s. And so we see this market by market. So overall cumes are dropping. And the other thing that we're seeing is, among others, I should say, is time shifting. A lot of people are using on-demand listening to go back and listen to a show they missed, or to hear a rebroadcast, or they're going to your website to consume a podcast that doesn't air on the main signal. Excuse me. And in a lot of cases, toggling between HD2 and HD3 options, depending on the mode that they're in. So the more you're offering, the more opportunity you have to engage them across a broader spectrum. And
Brian or Dave, do you all have anything you want to add? No? Okay, so I will add that I know the RRC has done this in the past, that if a station is preparing a meeting with university administration or with a board and you need some guidance on that, we are happy to meet with you and help you with that one-on-one. If you want, things like this, two to three stories to tell in that scenario, we'd be happy to help you with that. There have been occasions where we have actually joined a meeting with boards or university administration, just, to kind of help be the translator for this information. So reach out to us if that's something that you're interested in and you could use some help with. Lisa asks, what are some other anecdotal performance barometers stations can use aside from subscription services and how they might be valuable? So she's asking about, when you were talking about, David, you pay for Netflix, you pay for this, like, why not pay for public radio? I think that's what you're getting at, right, Lisa? Yeah.
So you can measure your site traffic, your streaming numbers are going to be very helpful. You can check individual day parts and see, is your morning drive carrying the freight for the rest of the station, things like that. Event attendance, so many stations are now, as you try to diversify and bring in other revenue outside of underwriting and individual support, hosting live events. Has attendance risen? Have you seen more interest among casual listeners coming to those events? Are there more people making inquiries about visiting the station for a tour or booking if you offer a performance space or a recording facility for podcasts, for example? You're seeing more inquiries coming through in that regard. And obviously donation volumes, whether it's the size of the individual donations themselves or the pool of donors that may or may not be increasing, can all be helpful in determining that growth too, or performance, I should say.
And again, just if you want to talk more about that or brainstorm on that, reach out. I mean, we are here. We're here to chat with you and help you with all of this. Drop any other questions in there. I'm going to go ahead and go to the next slide, which has our contact info on it. And also got a note from Amy on our team, who's here in the webinar, reminding me to remind you to follow us on LinkedIn. We've seen a lot of great growth on LinkedIn, which is wonderful, and we're active there. And we are, I think, just 15 followers away from an even 400. So I think we're all eager to get to that even 400. But Amy, you'd make Amy's day if you go and follow us on LinkedIn. So don't forget to do that. Amy just dropped a smiley in the chat. So any other questions? We've still got a few minutes left, but if there aren't any more questions, we're happy to return 10 minutes to your day. There's our contact information on the screen. So feel free to reach out to any one of us for anything that you need. And again, if you want a deeper dive on any of this for your station, just reach out. When this concludes, there'll be a link to a survey that pops up on your screen. It's a really, really short survey, I swear. I think it's like 4 or 5 questions, but it helps us with future webinar planning, helps us make these better for you, and there also is a place for you to suggest other webinars. So like format-specific webinars, we're going to put a pin in that. But anything else, any other ideas you have, send them our way. And I'm not seeing any other questions. So we will go ahead and wrap things up. But thank you all so much for joining us today. Brian, Dave, David, any last things you want to add?
Nope.
Now just set up a station consult because this is just an average. Let's look at your own station's real numbers.
Yep. And just thanks everyone for being here today and your support of the RSC.
Yep. Thanks so
Thank
much,
you.
everybody. We appreciate you joining us. We'll give you 10 minutes back in your day. Take care. Bye.